Hello and welcome to Harvest to You. I'm Pastor Marc, and it is a blessing to have you with us today. Listen, before we start the sermon, I want you to know about harvesttoyou.org. This is a space where you can find additional resources like sermons and devotionals, even a book I recently wrote. It's also a space where you can request prayer. I know that life can be hard, even lonely sometimes, and we would love to come alongside you with resources, equipping, and prayer for your life. Head on over to harvesttoyou.org.
If you got a Bible, go to Nehemiah chapter number 5. Nehemiah 5. While you turn there, let me just do a survey of the room. Who, maybe when you were a child, maybe now still as an adult, you as a hobby or as a side hustle, you collected some sort of cards. Baseball cards, Pokemon cards, hockey cards. Who collected cards, okay? I knew that there would be a sprinkling of you card collectors out here. My kids have recently got into collecting cards, especially football cards. If you came to my house right now, there are cards just everywhere. It feels like every nook and cranny of the house, you find some sort of football card. And the kids love to go to little card stores and they love to trade them. And a few months back, Brennan, my oldest, decided that he was going to set up a little shop in his room, and he was going to have a little card store, and he was going to invite his siblings, especially his brothers. Willow has a few cards, but she's not really that into it, but the boys are, and he was going to invite his brothers to come and to trade with him and to have a little card store. I did not know this. I was not home at the time, but they do their little card store scenario, and if there was a Better Business Bureau for brothers, they would have shut him down. Because Brennan, while generally a very generous person, he really is like generous at his core, he decided that he was going to rip off his brothers that day. And he was going to trade them like his worst cards, and he knew they were his worst cards. They're bent up, they're worth nothing. He knows it, they don't. They're naive, and he takes their best cards, he gives them junk cards for all their money, and he ends up with all the good cards and all the money, and he's offloaded all the ones that he didn't really want in the first place. I come home and I learn of this. And I learned of it by accident because the kids are like, look what we traded Brennan. And I'm like, Brennan, you knew what you were doing. And honestly, I became incensed. Like I was very angry, probably more angry than I should have been. And I told Brennan, like, we're undoing all of this. We're undoing all the trades. You're giving all the money back. I'm now the Federal Reserve of football cards. If there's any trades, they have to be approved by me first. If you do this again and you take advantage of your brothers, there's never a card store in our house again. Like, I probably overreacted a little bit, but it made me mad that he would take advantage of someone in his own household, like of his own kin, his brothers. I say all that because this is the story of Nehemiah 5. But instead of football cards, it's people's livelihoods. And it's amazing what happens here in this moment in Nehemiah 5. And I want you to see how Nehemiah in chapters 3 and 4 goes from opposition on the outside, from Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabians and the Samaritans, to oppression on the inside. Here it is, verse number 1. There was a great cry of the people and their wives against their brethren, the Jews. People have long looked at this and said, why does it specifically mention and their wives? And presumably, it's because in chapter 4, verse 22, we were told that the laborers on the wall were invited to stay inside of the community in the city walls and not go home to their homesteads and to their fields, to their vineyards, and to stay there and to labor. And as you could imagine, if you have harvest time and now the head of the household and maybe some of the servants are there working on the wall and they're staying there and they're not coming home, there's now extra responsibility even for the women, for the wives, to pick up the slack and to make sure that things happen. And there's this outcry that happens. And here's the outcry. First in verse 2, there's the wage earners and just the general employees. And they're saying, we, our sons and our daughters are many. We got big households, big families. Therefore, we take up corn for them that we may eat and live. And that's a request, a petition. We need some corn. We need food because we have to eat to live. Like we're becoming destitute and we're running out of food and we need someone to help us. The economic situation is not good. Verse number 3 and 4, there are the employers or those that owned the land and the vineyards and such. And here's what they say. Some also were there that said, we've mortgaged our lands and our vineyards and our houses that we can buy corn because of the dearth. There's some sort of famine. And we've had to mortgage all of our assets just so that we can eat, just so that we can get corn to be able to pay the laborers. They're saying we don't have corn. We're saying we don't have corn. Like everyone's in a strait here. This is a pickle. Verse number 4. There were also that said, we've borrowed money for the king's tribute, for taxes, and that upon our lands and vineyards. So not only have we mortgaged our lands, we've also taken out a loan, and we've used our land and our vineyards as collateral against the loan, and we had to get a loan to pay the taxes. This was customary in this day and age. This happened to the Jewish people when Babylon took over and they first conquered Jerusalem. Babylon was known to tax around 25%. In some instances, if you weren't on good behavior, they would tax 40, sometimes up to 60%. The Persians continued this tradition, and there was now a tax that was put on you because you were a subject of the kingdom. And when you have to take out a loan to pay your tax bill, that's a bad day. Like even for you and me personally. If you don't get a personal income tax return, here some of you probably got one, maybe in February or March, or you're expecting one. Others get a tax bill. If you have a tax bill and you have to take out a loan or put it on a credit card to pay it, that's not a good day. And they're saying we're in a financial strait. And if all that wasn't bad enough, you have verse number 5. Yet now our flesh is as the flesh of our brethren, our children as their children. They're setting the stage here and they're making an argument, a premise first. We're of the same community. We're all Jewish people. We're brothers and sisters here. And here's what's happening. Lo, we bring into bondage our sons and daughters to be servants. And some of our daughters are brought into bondage already. Neither is it in our power to redeem them or buy them back, for other men have our lands and our vineyards. When you got into a financial strait that was so bad, there were creditors that could come calling, and if you could not pay, the last resort was that someone in your family would be entered into debt slavery. They would come home in the evenings, they would come home on the weekends, typically speaking, but they now could not labor on your land or your fields. They now were an indentured servant and they had to work off the debt. At times, a daughter was sold to pay off a portion or all of the debt so that that daughter could now be the wife to that man or to one of his sons. And this is a bad position to be in. And what they're saying is, we're on the path to our kids being in debt slavery. As a matter of fact, some of them already are. Some of our daughters have already been sold, and we have no assets to be able to get them out of this situation because everything's leveraged. It's all leveraged to pay taxes. It's all leveraged just to have the basic essentials for life. And this is a problem. And the problem is that the creditors and those that are leveraging them are not outsiders. They're insiders. They're within the Jewish community. It doesn't say this overtly, but as you can imagine, they've been building the wall for some time and people are expending themselves. People are giving of their time. People are giving of their resources. They are investing heavily into the work of the community. And we saw in chapter number 4 that the work had to slow by at least half, because now half of the laborers are now standing guard to guard the walls. So this is slow going. We're going to see in a minute that this has been more than a decade into rebuilding the wall and restoring Jerusalem. It's been a long time. And all of this effort that people now have given and the sacrifice that they've given to better the community on a whole, to rebuild the walls, to restore the gates, to have some sort of security and protection. They are giving of themselves for the good of the community, but there's this little pocket inside of the community that's taking advantage of it. And they're now financially gaining and being greedy when these other people are being sacrificial. And what happens when they lay all this before Nehemiah is verse number 6. Nehemiah was very angry. He was ticked off when he heard their cry in these words. Now, this is a unique situation that you and I will never face. At least, I hope not. I hope that you're not selling your children into debt slavery this week, okay? If you are, let's talk after the service and let's get this on the right path. But there is a principle here that every leader of any sort will face. Nehemiah was facing opposition on the outside, and he was also facing problems and oppression on the inside. He had a battle to wage on two fronts, both external and internal. Anyone who leads in any capacity, whether you're leading a classroom because you're a teacher, you're leading a team because you're their coach, you're leading a church because you're a pastor, you're leading a home because you are a husband and a father, you're leading a business because you own the small business. Whatever you're leading, maybe you're just a department head at work, or there's nurses that work under you at the station. If you are leading in any way, shape, or form, this principle will be true. You can bank on it. You are going to face both external and internal problems that you will have to address. And it will not be fun. It will at times be frustrating. It will at times make you angry, like it did Nehemiah. But you're going to have to address both. If you want to have a business that's successful and own your own company, you're going to have external pressures. There's going to be market conditions, there's going to be inflation, there's going to be someone that leaves the company and they start a company that's eerily similar to your company, and now they want to poach your clients and bring them over to their company, and you're going to have all these things on the outside. You're also going to have things on the inside. This is why HR departments exist in large part, because there are going to be people that are lazy, and there's going to be people who have sexual harassment against each other, and there's going to be issues that need to be addressed inside, and you're going to have both and. It's not an either-or thing. If you have a home, and you want to lead your home well, and you want to be a man who steps up and says, you know what, I want to be committed to my wife, I want to have a marriage that's healthy, I want to lead my children well, as you should, and I want to raise them in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord, you're going to have external pressures and problems that you have to address. You're going to have a boss who becomes overly demanding and now is putting so much of a load on you that it's eroding all of the margin that is there for a date night with your wife or any time with the kids, and that goes on month after month after month, and you're going to have to address that. Or you're going to have someone you used to date who finds you on social media and sends you this message that seems timid and tepid. It's not a big deal at first, but am I going to rekindle or restart that conversation? You're going to have your kids who have a friend who's on the outside, and you're convinced that that kid is bad news, and you have to separate them somehow. You're going to have things that you have to address. That's life. You're also going to have things on the inside. You're going to have your own selfishness that you have to deal with. You're going to have children who fight with each other. You're going to have a mother-in-law who's nosy. If you're a mother-in-law in the room, that's obviously not about you. It's the other mother-in-law, not you. But you're going to have things on the inside, right? I could do this with any leadership position. You're going to have a battle on two fronts. And if you're not prepared for that, it can be discouraging and it can wear you out. But you have to know that's just life. There's external and internal pressures, and Nehemiah has now turned to some internal pressures, and he's very angry. And then verse number 7 happens. What does he do with his anger? This man is a genius. Here it is. I consulted with myself. Nehemiah was smart enough to take a beat and to not just lash out, to not just plow ahead, to not go Hulk mode and just start smashing everything. He was smart enough to say, you know what? Let's take a breath. Let's just take a minute. Let me think about this. I don't know if he slept on it, but I know that he took some time to consult with himself and to stop and to sit and to think. Lots of wisdom here. And then after he thinks about it, and he gets everything in order and he calms down a little bit, here's what he does. He gets to action. He gets to work. I rebuked the nobles and the rulers, and here's what I said unto them. You exact usury, every one of his brother, and I set a great assembly against them. Meaning, I'm going to call a big old business meeting, and we're going to put you on the carpet right now. Now, that phrase, you exact usury, every one of his brother, is an important phrase. In the Old Testament, the Jewish community was allowed to lend money and to have interest on that loan for outsiders. You could do that with outsiders. You could not do that with insiders. God was very clear about that. Very clear. Proverbs 6 is a great example of this. It's like abundantly clear. God saw that as you're a family and you're a community, and you should not take advantage of someone else's misfortune, that you have more than them in that way. You cannot have any interest on a loan. He did allow them to have collateral to secure a loan. He allowed that, and there were some regulations around it. Like, God was very thoughtful and was trying to do something that would promote the community on the whole. So like if you wanted to have a loan with collateral, you could not, for example, have their tools as collateral. You couldn't have a millstone or something like that where they needed that tool to make money or to make bread. Like you couldn't use that as collateral because he knew someone's going to be dumb enough to use their tools as collateral, and then they're going to lose their tools, and then they're just going to be toast. They're going to have nothing. You could not, if you had something with collateral and someone could not make good on their loan, God prohibited people from going into someone else's house to demand or to steal or to snatch that collateral. He had a sense of private property, and you were not allowed to just go have a search warrant and take your collateral whenever you wanted. He did not allow you to have someone's coat or clothing as collateral longer than a few hours. If someone gave you that as collateral, you had to give it back to them by the end of the day because they may need it to keep warm at night. There's a whole host of things that he had for the system. Those are a few, but the point is this: he was very in tune with the community, operating in a way that was good for the community and people not being taken advantage of. God did not want the Jewish people taking advantage of each other. And when Nehemiah says, you're exacting usury, we'll see in a minute that the usury was 12% annual interest was what they had. It's not that unreasonable in terms of an interest rate, but they were not allowed to do it. And Nehemiah stands up and says, you're not allowed to do this, and you better stop doing this. I'm calling it what it is. Verse number 8. I said unto them, to make matters worse, we, after our ability, have redeemed our brethren, the Jews, which were sold unto the heathen. We don't have a ton of information on this, but apparently at some point in time, there were Jewish people that were in a financial strait, and they had loans with those that were outside of the Jewish community, and they couldn't make good on those loans, so there were their sons and daughters that were sold into debt slavery. Apparently that had already happened, and there was some concerted effort to pull resources together and to get them all back and to pay off the debts and make sure that the sons and daughters were not indentured servants. And what he's saying is, we made a strong effort to make sure this was not the case. Middle of verse number 8. Will ye even sell your brethren? You're going to go redo what we undid? You're going to sell your own brothers and sisters? This was customary, that if they became your debt slave, you then could pass them along to someone else, or you could maybe sell that debt slave. You didn't need them, so you could sell them for 80 cents on the dollar, and someone else had them now. He's saying, what are you doing? Or shall they be sold unto us? And it says at the end of verse 8, they held their peace and they had nothing to answer. They had no excuse. They had no rationale. There was no good answer as to why they would do this other than something that was condemning. Like, yeah, we're greedy. Yeah, we disregarded God's laws. Verse number 9. Also I said, it's not good that you do. This is not good. And listen to his rationale. It's not just because God said. I love this, that Nehemiah had their testimony in mind. Ought ye not to walk in the fear of our God because of the reproach of the heathen, our enemies? Is there any sense, he appeals to this, any sense of a fear of God, meaning you have awe and reverence for God, and that provokes you to walk with kindness and integrity towards your fellow man? And what he says is, this is a terrible testimony. There are those that are without our community, and when they see us doing this to each other and making each other debt slaves and selling each other and doing this, this is something that ought not to be. Just our fear of God and our testimony with the world around us should cause us not to want to be these people. Verse number 9. I also said, we just read verse number 9. Verse 10, I likewise and my brethren, my servants, might exact of them money and corn. Look, if I wanted to, I could go demand that there's money or corn or things paid to me. I pray you, let us leave off this usury. Stop it. Verse 11, don't just stop it. He goes one step further. Restore, I pray you, even to them this day. Give them back lands, vineyards, olive yards, their houses, and the 100th part of the money, 1%. The 100th part is 1%, presumably a month, 12% annually. Give them back the interest, and of the corn and the wine, the oil that you exact of them. It sometimes wasn't 100 or 1% a month of the money. It was 100 or 1% a month, of your crops or of your oil or whatever you owned. And he says, give this back to them. Then they said, we will restore them. We'll require nothing of them. So we will do as thou sayest, verse number 12. Now, a credit to Nehemiah. In my limited experience, if you have a situation this big and you have to step up and you rebuke people and you rebuke them publicly, it normally doesn't go quite this well. So I'm super happy that in this moment they respond, they don't come up with lame excuses, they actually say, okay, we're gonna do this, we're gonna make it right. Sort of a Zacchaeus, the publican, the tax collector, who Jesus told, you gotta go make it right with all these people that you took advantage of. And he does, and he gives back, and he gives more. They own this, they know that it's wrong, and they start to make it right. And it's a beautiful moment where there's course correction internally inside of the community. But then verse number 12, apparently Nehemiah didn't quite believe them wholeheartedly, because they said we're gonna pay it back. And here's what he does. I called the priests, and I took an oath of them that they should do according to this promise. Guys, I appreciate your handshake deal, but I'm gonna get a minister over here and we're gonna take a vow. All right, we're gonna upgrade this promise and we're gonna make sure that this is a serious moment, which has been a long standing tradition that if you have a vow or a promise that is really serious, that you would invite a minister of God to administer that vow so that the vow is not just between humans, but now is also between God and man. This is why even today at a wedding, we require that there is a minister who has been ordained to stand at the wedding altar and to administer the do you so promise part, right? The vows of the marriage, because we believe as a culture that promise is so significant and so precious that there should be a minister administering that, so the vow is now between you and God and you and the individual that you're marrying. And he says, we're gonna upgrade this. I'm gonna need you to keep good on your word. And if that wasn't enough, he goes one more step, verse 13. Also, I shook my lap. And he said, what does that mean? Did he do a little jig, or what does he shake his lap? This was a custom that you would shake almost like an apron that you were cooking with or something. You'd shake it. Why would you shake it? Well, he tells you, verse 13, what it means. Here's what the custom meant. So God shake out every man from his house and from his labor that performs not the promise, even thus be shaken out and emptied. Meaning, not only did you take a vow, but I'm shaking my lap. That means I'm praying God curses you if you don't keep good on your word. It is my intention that God would do you dirty if you're doing other people dirty. That's what it meant. And so here's what happens, verse 13. All the congregation said, amen and praise the Lord. You know what? We agree with this, Nehemiah. We like the way that you're leading. We like what you're saying. This is good for the whole community. We praise the Lord for this. And praise the Lord for this. The people did according to the promise. Now, there's a lot that's going on here, but there's a few, I think, important lessons. First would be, it's so apparent in the text that the people of God are supposed to have a special consideration for the other people of God. And if the people of God can't get along with the other people of God, and they're all a part of the community, the Jewish community, a church community, the Christian community, broadly speaking, and Christians can't get along with each other, Christians are constantly locking horns with each other, Christians are taking advantage of each other, that is unfitting and it's unbecoming of the testimony of Jesus. This is why Paul, when he writes to the church at Corinth, and the Corinthian Christians are suing each other. And he tells them, this should not be. You may have disagreements, you may have issues, but you should be able to work this out amongst yourselves, and you should be able to somehow find a resolution, even if you have to say, you know what, I'm just going to forgive them and let it go. There should somehow be a resolution within the community. You should not have to go sue each other. He saw what Nehemiah saw, what God has always seen. That when the people of God are fighting with the other people of God and they're taking advantage of each other and they're manipulating each other, that is very unfitting, and it has a testimony to the world around us that is one that we don't want.
Jesus is not a myth, not a relic of history, not just a name on a church sign. Jesus is alive, and he is still changing lives even today. This Easter, join us in person at Harvest. Powerful worship, a clear message of hope, and a place for your entire family. Get all the details at harvesteaster.com. Jesus is. Discover why that matters.
Now, I want to commend you because you all, I think, on the whole, are very good at this, of having a testimony in our community of one that, like, when people come in, they generally can sense that there is a love for each other here. There is a generosity of spirit that one member has to another spirit, both in members being willing to, like, share their actual resources with each other, but also just a generous spirit of, like, I'll be forgiving and I'll be kind, and you know what, I don't really like the way you said that or you did that, but I'm gonna let you off the hook. I'm gonna give you the benefit of the doubt. Like, that generous spirit, that's something that should possess a church community. And when it does, it shines like light in darkness. It has a beautiful effect and testimony to both Christians that come in and are kind of looking at the community and should this be my church home, but also to people that are just around us. That's a beautiful thing to have. And I think that this church for a long time, even way before I was a pastor here, had this sort of reputation in community. And I want to commend you for that. I want to say, well done, keep that up. Because when the opposite happens, it's not good. When there's gossiping and there's slander and there's criticism and everyone is at each other's throats, that's a terrible, terrible thing. But there's also a lesson here in that Nehemiah was someone who was willing to see wrong, speak up against wrong, but do something about the wrong. This was a serious injustice. It was an injustice that they were charging interest in this way, and they were demanding that it be paid. And if it's not, then I'm going to claim your daughter and have her as a debt slave. And like, this was a serious injustice. And Nehemiah is someone who, yes, he saw it, give him credit for that. And yes, he spoke up, give him credit for that. But I think where the real credit is he was willing to not just point out the wrong, but he was willing to do the right. It is very easy to see what's wrong. I don't know if you know this. That's very easy. To find something to be critical of, even if your criticism is valid, about the airline that you just flew on, or about the company that you work for, or about the person who you're married to, or about your church, or about your mother-in-law, or about whoever. Finding something to be critical of is very easy. Saying something about that criticism is also pretty easy. If you doubt this, like, go on social media and check out your feed and see how many people can tell you all of the things that are wrong with them or this or that or the world. That's very easy to do. But being willing to step up and say, I don't want to just point out a problem, but I want to be a solution to that problem. And I want to step in and I want to help and I want to do something about it, that's hard to find. Those are the people that we note in history who did something, who stepped up, who were willing to sacrifice or take some risk and to stand up and not just speak out against something, but to actually put some shoe leather to it and work at it. There's a picture I want to show you of two individuals who I think exemplify this, who we still teach about in our history lessons and we admire greatly. It's a picture of William Wilberforce and Harriet Tubman. And they both, in their own way, they never knew each other personally, they both in their own way sought to combat and put action behind the injustice that they observed. Wilberforce was a member of the British Parliament back when slave trade was legal in the British Empire. And William Wilberforce was not only deeply offended by this and committed to the idea that it was an insidious evil, he was willing to do something about it when other members of Parliament who saw the same thing he saw, who maybe talked about it at dinner parties like he did, they were unwilling to stand up and do something. They were unwilling to even vote with him when he would put forward bills. And he labored for 20 years to see the abolition of slavery in the British Empire. And 3 days before he died, Parliament finally enacted and passed a law that effectively abolished slavery in the British Empire. Harriet Tubman was someone who was affected, not only saw injustice, but lived the injustice and was a slave herself and escaped slavery and decided that this injustice was so egregious that she had to do something about it. She couldn't just talk about it. She couldn't just live up north and let people know it was a problem, but she had to go back south and to lead caravans and little groups of people out of slavery back north, and became known as Moses was her nickname, because just like Moses led the children of Israel out of slavery and the Exodus out of Egypt, she was leading people out of slavery up north. These are people that still have their pictures and their names in our history books because they were people who didn't just see problems, they didn't just talk about problems, but they wanted to do something about the problem. Be a person of action. If you have a problem, have solutions. If you have solutions, try to be a part of that solution, not just present them to someone else. Hey, there's this problem at work, and you know what? I gave my boss some solutions, and he never did anything with them. What can you do? What can you do with them? If there's injustice that you see, injustice is real. It always has been real. Don't just be willing to point it out. Don't just be willing to shine a spotlight on it. Be willing to speak up. Be willing to do something. Nehemiah is someone who ultimately was a person of action. And I think the reason that he was not just a person of action, but a person of action who was listened to and admired and people took their cues from him is because of the rest of the chapter. He's going to tell us something about himself, and it's not meant to be braggadocious. It's meant to say, this is my resume, and this is why I should be a credible source here, and why you should listen to me. Here it is, verse number 14. Nehemiah himself was willing to be disadvantaged for the advantage of other people. Verse 14, moreover, from that time I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah. How long were you governor, Nehemiah? From the 20th year, even unto the 32nd year of Artaxerxes the king. And in case you struggle at math, he does it for you. That is 12 years. So Nehemiah was there as governor for 12 years. We're assuming that this is like around the 12th year, that this isn't year one. And here's what he says about his 12 years as the governor. I and my brethren, we've not eaten of the bread of the governor. You say, well, what's the bread of the governor? That sounds weird. The bread of the governor is basically the wage and the perks that were due the political official. We still have this in our political system, that if you're a member of Congress or the Senate or the president, that there's a wage that comes with that, and there's some perks that come with that. You're not exactly flying back and forth to D.C. on your own dime. And he says, the perks and the salary that was offered me, I didn't take it. But those that were before me did. Look at verse number 15. The former governors that had been before me, they were chargeable unto the people, like they were accountable to them. They had taken of them bread and wine, and beside 40 shekels of silver. Yea, even their servants bear rule over the people. They made their employees the bosses of everybody, and they wanted to tell them all what to do. But so did I not. Why? Because of the fear of God. The same fear of God that should have possessed you, where you had awe and reverence for God, and it spurred in you a desire to be kind and to have integrity towards your fellow man. This was in me. And all the governors before me, even though things were tight, they took their bread and they took what they needed to live. They took their money. They took advantage of what was offered them. I haven't done any of this. Verse 16, yea, also, I continued in the work of this wall. I'm not just telling people what to do. I'm right here with you, shoulder to shoulder. My hands are as calloused as yours. Neither bought we any land. All my servants were gathered into the work. I'm working on your behalf. I have those that are under me working on your behalf. I'm not buying up your lands with all my money, and I'm not having you somehow be beholden to me. Verse 17, moreover, if that wasn't enough, there were at my table 150 of the Jews and rulers, besides those that came from us from among the heathen that are about us. I was constantly playing host. We know from earlier Nehemiah that he did use the governmental housing that was his. He did dwell in the palace of sorts. But he says, at my table, I constantly had my servants, my entourage, my bodyguards. I also had other Jewish officials. And then I also had outside officials, people that were visiting us from other places. And I played host to them. They were at my table, like 150 people every day. If you've ever hosted Easter or Thanksgiving and you've had 20 of your family members over, you know how much time and how expensive it can be to host large groups of people. Verse number 18, how much did you need to accomplish this hosting, Nehemiah? That which was prepared for me daily was 1 ox, 6 choice sheep, good ones, not junk ones, also fowls that were prepared for me, and once in 10 days store all sorts of wine. Yet for all this required not I the bread of the governor. Why? Because the bondage was heavy upon this people. What is he saying? He's saying, you know me. We've been together over a decade. It's been 12 years. I worked with you. I put my servants to work for you. Do I have a bunch of assets to my name because I'm the governor? Did I go scoop up everyone's land and get deals and somehow work a deal and take advantage of somebody? No. I didn't take any money. I haven't taken any bread. I've let everyone else have it. As a matter of fact, out of my own pocket, I'm hosting 150 people. There's an oxen, there's 6 sheep, there's fowls, there's all this stuff that I'm using to host. Like, what he's saying is, you know my resume, and I believe with all my heart that his resume is lending him credibility so that when he steps up and says, you shouldn't do this stuff, the people say, we know this guy, and we know that he doesn't do this stuff. As a matter of fact, he is unbelievably sacrificial and generous, and he has the good of the whole on his mind all the time. And because of this, we're going to listen to him and we're going to follow him. He leverages his own personal testimony, and he tells us what a good leader would do. That a good leader would be willing to disadvantage themselves so that the others, the whole, can be advantaged. I once heard the coach of Georgia football say that leadership is hard, and he gave a few different leadership lessons, but one of the things that he said was that if you have to lead, you are going to have to make decisions that negatively affect people you care about, but it is good for the whole. That's true. When he said that, and I've remembered it for years, I never interpreted that, though, as you're going to have to make decisions that negatively affect people you care about, as like you're going to have to negatively affect people you care about. Because we all have a tendency, including yours truly, to care about ourselves the most. If you're anything like me, you have a bit of a selfish nature. And it's very difficult to make a decision that negatively affects you, but is going to produce something good in somebody else. This is what the Apostle Paul was a master at. He called it death in me, life in you. But that's what a good leader does. Ultimately, when we look at Nehemiah, there's a lot to admire here, but we really look through Nehemiah to the Lord Jesus, who is the pinnacle of an example of this, of someone who was willing to humble himself and come to earth, someone who was willing to give up resources, someone who was willing to serve his disciples and wash their feet and take up the towel, someone who was willing to disadvantage himself so much so that he would die and become obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. Why would you be tortured? Why would you be mocked? Why would you give up the ultimate thing that you could give up, your own life? Why would you do that? So that others could be advantaged, so that we could have forgiveness of sins, so that we could have eternal life, so that we could have a home in heaven, so that we could have the adoption of sons, so that we could have the Spirit in our lives. I will disadvantage myself and die for you so that you can be advantaged. That is beautiful leadership. That's what real leadership is. This is what men who are responsible to lead your homes, and you are. Leading your home does not mean that you are a dictator who gets to boss the kids around and they become your little servants and she makes you a sandwich. That's not what it is. It's being humble. It's being willing to sacrifice yourself and say, I will take more on. I will be last. I will be willing to put you first so that my wife and my children can flourish, and I may have to take it on the chin. I may have to bleed for the mission. I may have to have sacrificial obedience, but I'm willing to do that so that other people can be advantaged, and I want to lead my home well and see my family flourish. That's good leadership. This is something that I wish that I was exceptional at. I wish that I could read this and be yeah, that's me 98% of the time. It's not. I'd love to be better at it, because this is gorgeous, where he says, I'll disadvantage myself for you. I'll do it. And here is the end verse. Here's part of why he can do this. He can do this because he really wants the community's good. He can do this, we've seen, because he has a fear of God. But he can also do it because he understands something. And here's a prayer in verse number 19. It's short, it's simple, but it's awesome. Think upon me, my God. Think upon me for good, according to all that I have done for this people. Nehemiah understood something. He understood that when he was sacrificing for the good of other people, that not only did heaven pay attention, but heaven paid well. He says, God, I want you to see this, and I want you to think on me for good, and I want you to give me some sort of reward or retribution for the sacrifices I'm making for this people. You say, well, I see. He was ultimately selfishly motivated. When it was all said and done, he wanted something out of this deal, didn't he? That's not selfish at all. That's just understanding the nature and the character and the heart of God. That when God sees you do what's right, even when no one else sees it, when God sees you act with integrity, when God sees you refuse to respond in kind to them, when he sees you being willing to give up what you would love to have for other people, when he sees a generous spirit, when God sees it, even if no one else sees it, even if no one else gives you applause or an attaboy or accolades or rewards, and there's nothing that comes your way, even if someone sees it and they don't appreciate it. This does happen sometimes, where you're well-intentioned as a spouse and you're trying to be sacrificial, but then it blows up in your face and they don't interpret it as sacrificial. That's real life. What do? Just get super frustrated and say, I'm done with this. It doesn't work. I'm not doing it anymore. No. You understand that there's an audience of one who sees, who pays attention, who notes everything, doesn't forget a thing, and not only does he pay attention, he pays well. The people of God have always remembered that one day there are dividends and there is interest. We don't need to exact interest and take advantage of each other here, because heaven's going to give us that interest. Remember what Naomi told Ruth when Ruth decided to leave her family and to be with her mother-in-law and to go with the people of God. Her prayer for Ruth was what? That the Lord would recompense or repay your work and a full reward would be given you from the Lord God of Israel. What was it that the psalmist said about men of integrity? He said, a man will say that there's reward for the righteous. Verily there is reward for the righteous. Verily is God a judge that judges in the earth. Listen, if you're righteous and you act in righteous behavior, there's a reward for you. What did Jesus tell us in Luke chapter number 6? That if you love your enemies and you do good and you lend and you hope for nothing again. This is very Nehemiah 5. You're just lending to people and you don't need interest. You don't need them to repay you. You don't even need collateral. What happens? Your reward shall be great. You shall be the children of the highest. What does Hebrews tell us? Hebrews tells us not to cast away our confidence. Why would we not cast away our confidence? Why would we not doubt? Well, there's a reward for the righteous. What reward? Well, it tells you. There's great recompense of reward. You have need of patience that after you have done the will of God, you might receive the promise. Be patient, keep going, stay faithful. God rewards. Hebrews 11, he is a rewarder of those that diligently seek him. And I could go on. There's all of this press in the Bible that tells you over and over again that heaven's going to reward you one day. If you're righteous, if you're faithful, if you have sacrificial obedience, if you operate in a non-selfish way for the good of other people, honestly, it's probably something that people will take note of here on earth and they will respect you for it here on earth. It probably will happen, but if that never happens, heaven pays attention and heaven pays well. Isn't this exactly what has happened with Jesus? We see him serving the disciples. We see him dying on a cross. We see him disadvantaging himself for the advantage of other people. And what do we now do? We give him praise. We give him honor. He's seated at the right hand of the Father. He deserves all glory. There's a name that is above every name. What is happening? It's the same principle that's happening with Nehemiah. He sacrifices, he is humble, he is obedient even unto death, and there is great heavenly reward that is now due his name because of that sacrifice. And it is the same thing for any person. Doesn't matter if you're a pastor or not. If you are a Christian and you are willing to put yourself out there, to fight against injustice, to do your best to see the good come out of other people, even if it means death in you, but it's life in them. You can't go wrong with that. You just can't go wrong with that. And Nehemiah is someone who not only lives it, but he calls other people to live it. And he says, let this be true of our community. Man, I think this is true of our church community, but if it became truer, I know that's not great grammar, if it became more true, it'd be a wonderful thing where people say, I love you, and I love you, and I love you. And if you're not in here and you're on the outside, I love you too. And I'm willing to move in humility and selflessness so that you can find God, so that you can be close to God, so that you can have what you need. That's something that is irreplaceable. That is something that is gold. It's golden when people will sacrifice and live in that way.
I pray that today's message challenged and encouraged you in your walk with Christ. And if this sermon was a blessing to you, know that it was made available because of our financial partners. I want to take a moment and invite you to be a part of that tribe. I know not everyone's in a position to give, and if that's you, then please just let this broadcast be a blessing. There are no strings attached. But if God's blessed you with the ability to give, I would love for you to link arms with us and support what God is doing here. As a small way of saying thank you for your generosity, I'd love to send you a copy of my new book, The Prayer Jesus Gave. This is a guided tour through the model prayer, the Our Father, as some call it. And if you've ever felt like your prayer life could use an upgrade, I know it will be a help. You can give and receive your copy at harvesttoyou.org/give or by mailing a donation to the address on your screen. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next Sunday.